My wife left me on a Saturday morning because I had spent 2 years sending every dollar I had to a medical billing office in Asheville, North Carolina to keep my dying father alive. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She just set her coffee cup down on the kitchen counter, looked at me across the room and said, "Caleb, I have given you every chance I have, but I cannot keep living with a man who gives everything he has to everyone except the people standing right in front of him." She picked up her bag. She walked out. And the worst part, the part that still sits heavy, is that I understood exactly why she left and couldn't find a single word to ask her to stay. 8 months later, my father died anyway. So there I was, 30 years old, no wife, no father, an apartment in Chicago that felt like a waiting room for a life I hadn't started yet. I was good at my job keeping strangers alive in an emergency room and absolutely terrible at keeping myself alive in any way that actually mattered. And then I got on a plane, and a woman in a yellow jacket sat down next to me in seat 14B. I didn't know it yet. But I was about to walk into the worst weekend of my adult life, a man with a grudge, a woman who deserved better, a wedding that almost fell apart, and a moment where everything I thought I understood about staying calm under pressure got tested in a room full of people watching. And somehow on the other side of all of it, I found everything I didn't know I was still looking for. This is that story. Stay with me. The thing nobody tells you about grief is that it doesn't feel like sadness at first. It feels like static. Every frequency in your body broadcasting at once and none of it resolving into anything coherent. I'd been running on that static since Wednesday morning when Gerald from next door called at 6:42 a.m. to tell me my father had passed in his sleep. Peaceful, he said. No pain. Wasn't that a mercy? I booked the first flight out. Thursday morning. Gate H7 O'Hare International. I found my seat, 14A, window. Stowed my bag, sat down, looked out at the tarmac. The sky was flat, October gray. I had not slept. I was still staring when someone dropped into the seat beside me. Not sat dropped with the energy of a person who had been moving fast all morning and was only now letting herself stop. "Oh, good," she said loud enough that the man across the aisle glanced over. "A window seat person. I cannot do middle seats. I have a whole thing about middle seats that I won't get into because we just met, but trust me." Yellow jacket, the specific yellow of early autumn, warm and deliberate. Dark hair pulled back imperfectly. A canvas tote bag, she was wrestling under the seat with one foot while checking her boarding pass with the other hand. 14B? She squinted at the pass. "Yes, hi, I'm Nora." Real handshake, actual grip. "Caleb," I said. "You look like a Caleb," she said, clicking her seatbelt. "Steady energy. I mean that as a compliment." "Is that a real thing?" "I made it up just now," she said, completely unbothered. "But you didn't argue, so it's probably true." She pulled out a paperback and cracked it open, then stopped. "Going home or leaving?" she asked. Such a specific question. Not "where are you headed?" Going home or leaving, like she already understood those were two entirely different things. "Going home," I said. "My dad passed away yesterday." She closed the book. Didn't perform it, just closed it, set it in her lap, and looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't any of the things I'd been receiving for 24 hours. Just attention, full and quiet and without agenda. "I'm sorry," she said, clean and true, no follow-up. The plane pushed back. Chicago slid past the window. "You're from Asheville?" I asked. I don't know why I kept talking. Something about the quality of her attention that made the static settle slightly. "Born and raised. Northside Merriman Avenue. You..." "Westside Brevard Road." Her eyebrows went up. "Are you serious?" "Same city," I said. "Different zip code." "We probably went to the same Ingles," she said, something lighting up in her face. "Same Friday night football games. Same Blue Ridge Parkway every fall." "How have we never..." She stopped, shook her head. "Big enough to miss each other, I guess?" "Small enough that we probably shouldn't have," I said. She smiled quick and real surprised out of her, and for 3 seconds the static went completely quiet. Then she asked, "What was he like?" I blinked. 24 hours of condolences, phone calls, neighbors leaving food on my doorstep. Not one person had asked that. They'd asked how I was holding up. They'd asked about arrangements. Nobody had asked what he was like. My throat did something I didn't expect. "He coached Little League for 11 years, I said, voice unsteady in a way I couldn't control and didn't try to. "Never had a kid go pro. Didn't care. Made the same pot of chili every Sunday from October through March and swore it improved every week." almost a smile. It never did. He just loved making it. My jaw tightened. He knew the name of every nurse on his hospital floor, their kids, their dogs. He was the kind of man who made you feel like you mattered to him within 30 seconds of meeting you. I stopped. I've spent my whole life trying to figure out how he did it. Nora's eyes were bright, holding something back carefully. I think you figured it out, she said quietly. You're doing it right now. You just don't know it yet. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged on. The Blue Ridge Mountains appeared through a break in the clouds, gray-green, ancient, folded against each other like something sleeping. We landed with a bump. Asheville spread out beneath us, small and real and full of everything I'd been avoiding since Wednesday morning. Nora was already standing in the aisle, bag down, when she turned back. This is going to sound forward, she said, phone out. But would it be okay if I had your number? I'd like to keep talking if that's all right. My father used to say the most important things in life don't announce themselves. They just show up, quietly, in the seat next to you on an ordinary Thursday morning when you're too hollowed out to be looking. I gave her my number. She texted immediately, just a period, so I'd have hers. Then she smiled, pulled her yellow jacket straight, and walked up the aisle. I sat in 14A until the plane was nearly empty. Then I picked up my bag and walked out into the Asheville morning. And for the first time in 48 hours, I took a breath that went all the way down. My dad's house smelled like him. Motor oil and Folgers and the ghost of 30 years of Sunday chili baked so deep into the walls that nothing short of demolition was ever going to get it out. I stood in the doorway Thursday afternoon with my bag on my shoulder and my hand on the frame and let it hit me. All of it, the smell and the silence and the library book on the coffee table with a receipt for a bookmark because he never used real bookmarks, always whatever was in his pocket. He was not coming back to finish that book. I sat down on the couch and called Asheville Funeral and Cremation Services on Merriman Avenue. The woman who answered had a voice built specifically for this kind of call, low and steady and professionally kind, and she walked me through the initial arrangements with the patience of someone who understood the person on the other end was only partially present. Death certificate, transportation, service date, burial plot, which my father had purchased years ago right next to my mother's at Riverside Cemetery because of course he had planned that quietly and never mentioned it so I wouldn't worry. I made it through the whole call without my voice breaking once. 6 years of emergency medicine will do that to you. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet of his living room and listened to the house breathe around me, the small creaks of old wood, the refrigerator cycling on and off, the blue jay outside making noise in the oak tree, and I thought about how a house can feel entirely different when the person who made it a home is gone. Same walls, same furniture, same smell, but something essential removed from the atmosphere. My phone buzzed. The period, 14B. Hey, just checking you got in okay. No need to respond if you're in the middle of things. That last sentence. Not feel free to text whenever. Not hope you're doing okay with an exclamation point that asked for reassurance in return. Just permission not to respond. I stared at it for a long moment. Got in, I typed back. Thank you for checking. She sent a single thumbs up. Nothing else. I put the phone down and went back to sitting in my father's house. Friday morning, I was on the front porch at 7 with a cup of his Folgers when Gerald came over from next door. 73 years old, retired postal worker, New Balance sneakers in rotating colors. He had been my father's closest friend for 2 decades. He talked about you every single day, Gerald said, settling into the other chair. Every day, Caleb. You know how men of his generation get about saying things directly. He never said it to your face the way he should have. He looked out at the yard. But he said it to me. And to Margaret at the post office, and to every nurse on his floor. He said it to everyone except the one person who needed to hear it. My throat closed. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and said nothing. Gerald left around 9. People began arriving after that. Neighbors, people from Dad's church, his physical therapist Patrice, who cried harder than anyone. I stood at the door and shook hands and accepted casserole dishes with both hands the way my mother had taught me, and I did not break once. I was still at the door around noon when I noticed it. A small wreath on the far end of the porch railing away from the foot traffic, placed carefully so as not to be in anyone's way. White and green, simple. A small card tucked into the stems, handwritten, with sympathy and kindness. Nora, I read it twice, looked up, looked down the front walk toward the street. A yellow jacket, moving fast almost to the corner, head down. Hey, My voice came out louder than I meant. "Nora." She stopped. Turned. Her face, when she saw me standing there, did something complicated. Surprise. Underneath surprise, the look of someone who had calculated carefully and still gotten caught. "I wasn't going to knock," she said, walking back slowly, hands in her pockets. "Jess knew your family. She mentioned the address. I didn't want to intrude. I just wanted to leave something." "You came," I said. "I left a wreath." She stopped a few feet away and pushed her hair back, flustered in a way that was completely different from the composed woman on the plane. "That's a small thing. Don't make it into—" I closed the distance and put my arms around her. She went still for exactly 1 second. Then her arms came up around my back and she held on, and I pressed my face into her shoulder and felt the specific warmth of another human being who had come to this house for no reason except that she thought it might help, and something in my sternum cracked clean through. "Thank you," I said into her shoulder, voice completely wrecked. "I just needed to feel something real for a minute. Everything today has been so—" I stopped, pulled back enough to look at her. My eyes were burning. "Thank you for coming." Nora's jaw was tight. Her own eyes were bright and wet at the corners. She reached up and put one hand flat against my chest, right over my sternum, like she was checking that something was still beating in there. "He sounds like someone worth every single person on that porch," she said, voice steady but only barely. "Every casserole, every handshake, all of it." I nodded, couldn't speak. She dropped her hand, stepped back, straightened her jacket. "Go back inside," she said. "You have people who need you." She almost smiled. "I'll text you later, okay?" I watched the yellow jacket disappear around the corner. Then I turned around and went back inside my father's house, and for the first time all day I felt like I might actually make it through. She texted again Friday evening around 7. I was at my father's kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of me, working through everything that needed to happen in the next 72 hours. Obituary, flowers for the service, call Dad's brother in Knoxville, figure out what to do with the library book on the coffee table 2 weeks overdue, never to be returned by the person who checked it out. The phone buzzed. That bait and tackle shop on the east side of Blue Ridge Lake. Max, still open. I stared at the message, then typed back before I'd fully decided to. Still open. 3rd generation now. Dad went every Saturday morning, April through October. He knew the owner's grandfather. 3 dots. Then, of course he did. Of course he knew the grandfather. Something loosened in my chest, small but real. He knew everyone I typed. We'd go somewhere new, and within 20 minutes he had the life story of whoever was behind the counter. "That's not a problem," she wrote. "That's a superpower." I set the phone down, looked at the legal pad, picked it back up. "How do you know Jess?" I asked. 4th grade, she wrote immediately. "She moved in 2 houses down, and by October we were inseparable. She decides you're her best friend before you've agreed to it. 20 years later, I'm still not sure I had a choice. Sounds like a good person to have in your corner." "The best." Then after a pause long enough that I almost set the phone down. "Can I tell you something?" At this point in my week, I typed, "Crazy has a very high bar." The 3 dots pulsed, disappeared, appeared again, disappeared. Then her message came all at once, long, like she'd written it before letting herself send it. "Derek, my ex, is going to be at Jess's wedding Saturday. We were together for 2 years. I left 8 months ago. People keep asking me why, and I never know how to explain it because there was no single dramatic moment. It was just everything slowly. He decided what I wore. He decided where we went and who we saw. He called my job a hobby in front of his colleagues at dinner once and then told me I was being sensitive when I got upset. He monitored my phone. He controlled the money I had to ask permission to buy groceries above a certain amount." Another message right after. "I know how it sounds. I know people wonder why I stayed as long as I did. But when you're inside it, you don't see it clearly. You just think you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, too difficult, too much. And then one day you wake up and realize you've become someone you don't recognize and the only way back is out." I read it twice. Then I got up from the table and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at my father's garden tomato cages standing empty in the October dirt, the mountains dark beyond the yard. "You're not too much," I typed. "You were with someone who needed you to be less so he could feel like more. That's not the same thing." 3 dots. Then, "That might be the clearest anyone has ever said that to me." ER nurse, I typed. "We learn to say things clearly." A pause. Then, "There's something else. Derek has been under investigation by the IRS for the past year. Tax fraud shell companies, falsified deductions, the whole thing. I found out when we were together. Suspicious accounts, invoices that didn't make sense. I didn't report it because I was scared of him. A beat. Someone else did. I found out last week that the investigation is active. I don't know what happens at the wedding. I just know he's going to be there, and I can't walk in alone and give him the satisfaction of seeing me by myself. I stood at the window for a long moment. Derek had spent 2 years making Nora believe she was the problem, had controlled everything, her clothes, her money, her friendships, her sense of herself, had called her work a hobby in front of people she wanted to impress, had monitored her phone like she was property, and now he was going to walk into her best friend's wedding and do what men like him always do. Occupy the room on the narrative, make her feel small in the place where she should feel safest. I understood something about people like Derek. I'd seen them in the ER, not always as patients, sometimes as family members. The ones who needed to be the most important person in every room they entered, who shrank the people around them to make themselves feel larger. I went back to the table, picked up the phone, when and where I typed. 3 dots appeared instantly. Saturday evening, venue near Biltmore Estate. Caleb, are you sure it's a lot to ask? You came to my father's house with a wreath and didn't knock, I wrote. I think we're past a lot to ask. She sent back something I hadn't seen from her yet, a single exclamation point. Just one, like she'd started to say something bigger and caught herself. I smiled at my phone in my dead father's kitchen. Then I set it down and went to find my suit in the closet of my old bedroom. It was in a garment bag from 2 Christmases ago, navy blue simple cut, the kind of suit that didn't announce itself. On the shelf above it, in a small wooden box I had seen my whole life and never opened, I found something I wasn't expecting, a gold bracelet. Delicate, worn smooth, the way jewelry gets from decades of daily use, and underneath it, folded once, a piece of paper in my father's slow, uneven handwriting from this past year. This was your mother's. I gave it to her the week I first told her I loved her. I've been saving it for you. You'll know when the time is right. Don't wait as long as I did, son. Dad. I sat down on the edge of my childhood bed with the bracelet in my palm and let the words blur. Outside, the Blue Ridge night was quiet and enormous and completely indifferent to the fact that I was sitting in my childhood bedroom holding everything my father had left me and finally starting to understand what he meant. I had not been to a wedding since my own. Dana and I got married on a Saturday in June 3 years ago at a small venue outside Chicago with 40 people and a jazz trio and a cake that was supposed to be lemon and came out tasting mostly like ambition. I remember standing at the end of the aisle watching her walk toward me and thinking I was the luckiest man in that room. I thought about that on the drive to the venue Saturday afternoon. About how certain you can be about something and still be wrong, not about the feeling, but about whether the feeling alone is enough to hold 2 people together when everything else starts pulling them apart. The venue was a restored farmhouse 12 miles south of Asheville near the Biltmore Estate. White fences, rolling pasture, a barn converted into a reception hall with exposed beams and string lights and round tables in cream linen. The kind of place that makes you feel walking in like the world outside has agreed to pause. I parked and checked my phone. I'm by the white tent near the entrance Nora had texted. You can't miss it. I found her in 30 seconds. She was standing just outside the tent in a dark burgundy dress, her hair down for the first time since I'd met her. She'd been talking to an older woman in a cream blazer, sharp-eyed, unhurried, and when she saw me coming, she said something to the woman and walked over. You made it, she said. Told you I had a suit, I said. She looked me over once quickly. You look good, Caleb. You look like yourself, I said. That's the best thing I can say about anyone. Something moved across her face, warm and quick. Then she offered me her arm. Ready? Ready, I said. The ceremony was in the pasture chairs facing a wooden arch wound with white flowers. Jess, small and dark-haired and incandescently happy, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and her groom, Paul, watched her come like he was watching something he still couldn't quite believe was happening to him. Nora squeezed my arm when Jess passed our row tight just once, and her jaw worked with the specific control of someone who had already decided they were not going to cry and was now in active combat with themselves about it. She's beautiful, I said quietly. Don't, Nora said, voice strained. I just did my mascara. I looked straight ahead so she wouldn't see me almost smile. The ceremony was short and genuine. The officiant made a joke about parallel parking that got a real laugh, including from Jess, which told you everything about what kind of marriage it was going to be. By the time Paul kissed his bride, the woman in the row ahead was openly weeping, and even I felt something shift in my chest. Something adjacent to hope that I hadn't felt in long enough that I almost didn't recognize it. We moved inside for cocktail hour. String lights, Fleetwood Mac through the speakers, the warm smell of food and candles, and 100 people genuinely glad to be in the same room. Nora navigated it smoothly, greeting people, steering us toward the bar, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen her yet. Then she went still beside me. I followed her gaze. Derek Voss was standing near the entrance with a woman I didn't recognize, tall, dark-haired, expensive dress, her hand on his arm with the practiced ease of someone who had been there many times before. Derek himself was exactly what I had expected. Broad-shouldered, well-dressed, the kind of man who takes up space in a room like he owns the square footage. He had a wide, easy smile that he was currently deploying on the couple next to him with the precision of someone who had learned exactly how much warmth to perform. The woman beside him laughed at something he said and leaned into his shoulder. "Is that—" I started. "Dana," Nora said. Her voice was flat. "I don't know her well. She moved to Asheville about a year ago. She and Derek have apparently been—" She stopped. Her hand tightened around her glass. "She knows we were together. She reached out to me 2 months ago. Very friendly. Asked me to coffee." Nora's jaw tightened. "I thought she was being kind. I think now she was checking me out, seeing if I was a threat." I watched Derek work the room. The way he moved through it, easy, confident, everyone turning toward him. I'd seen that type in the ER too. Not always his patients. "He came here on purpose," I said. "Of course he did." Nora's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white around the glass. "He knew I'd be here. He knew I'd be alone. He wanted me to see him walk in with her." She took a slow breath. "He wanted me to know he replaced me before I'd even finished leaving." Derek's eyes found Nora across the room. His smile didn't change. It just recalibrated. The way a camera adjusts focus. He said something to Dana, and she looked over too, and something passed between them that I couldn't read from across the room, but didn't need to. Then Derek started toward us. "Here we go," Nora said quietly. I put my hand at the small of her back, light steady just there, and felt her take one long, slow breath as Derek closed the distance between us with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once in his life felt unwelcome anywhere. "Nora," he said, stopping in front of us. The smile was fully deployed. "You look wonderful." His eyes moved to me. "And you must be—" "Caleb," I said. I did not extend my hand. Derek looked at me for a moment, taking inventory the way men like him do. The suit, the posture, the hand at Nora's back. Something calculated moved through his expression and then resolved back into that easy smile. "Caleb," he repeated. "Good to meet you." He glanced at Dana beside him, who was watching Nora with an expression that was carefully pleasant and not quite friendly. "We were just heading to find our seats. Enjoy the evening." He moved away. Nora exhaled slowly beside me. "That was the warm-up," she said. "I know," I said. From 2 tables over, the older woman in the cream blazer, the one Nora had been talking to by the tent, caught my eye. She raised her glass of white wine exactly 1 inch in my direction. I raised mine back. "Who is that?" I asked. "Marge," Nora said. "She sees everything, I mean everything." She glanced over. "She's been coming to Jess's family events since before Jess was born." Marge took a slow sip and turned back to her table like nothing had happened at all. The reception moved inside around 6. Round tables, string lights, the warm smell of food, and the specific noise of 100 people who had reached the comfortable stage of a good wedding, shoes off under the table, wine glasses refilled without counting conversations that had been waiting for this exact room to happen in. Derek found his moment about 40 minutes in. He had been working the room all evening. I'd been watching him do it the way I watch everything in a space I don't fully trust. Table to table, group to group, the wide, easy smile, landing on people and moving on, leaving behind a specific impression, important, generous, the kind of man you were glad was here. I'd seen enough people perform warmth in my career to recognize the mechanics of it. Derek wasn't warm. He was skilled. He drifted toward our table during the salad course with a group of 3 people I didn't recognize, friends of Paul's. I gathered people who moved in Derek's orbit without knowing what his orbit cost. "Nora," he said, stopping beside her chair. Warm, inclusive, like they were old friends at a reunion. "I didn't get a chance to ask earlier, are you still doing the violin thing?" "The violin thing." Nora's shoulders went very still. just for a second. The kind of stillness that comes from training yourself not to react to something that has hit you before and will hit you the same way every time, no matter how prepared you are. Still teaching, yes, she said, level, clean. That's great. Derek looked at the people beside him with a smile that invited them into something. Nora teaches music to elementary school kids, little violins. He held his hands up 8 inches apart, indicating the size of a child's instrument. Very sweet. One of the men beside him chuckled. Not unkindly, he just took the shape Derek had offered him and filled it without thinking. It's actually a real career, Nora said, still level. I have 42 students. Of course it is, Derek said in the specific tone that means the opposite. I just always thought with your ear you could have done something more. He paused like he was searching for the right word when he already knew exactly what he was going to say. Substantial. The table went slightly quiet. Not dramatically, just the specific quiet of people who have registered that something has happened and are waiting to see how it resolves. I set down my fork. I did it slowly, the way I do everything when the situation requires me to be the steady one, not because I'm not feeling anything, but because I've learned that the most useful thing a person can do in a room that's about to go wrong is refuse to go wrong with it. I stood up. Not fast, not aggressive. I just stood up from my chair to my full height and looked at Derek with the same expression I use when someone in my ER is making a difficult moment worse on purpose. I've worked in an emergency room for 6 years, I said. My voice was even, conversational almost. Parents come in at 2 in the morning because their kid is in crisis cutting, withdrawing, falling apart. Sometimes we can help medically, sometimes we can't. I looked at Derek directly. But I've had parents tell me more than once that the thing that turned it around wasn't the medication or the therapy or anything we did. It was a teacher. A specific teacher who showed up every Tuesday and didn't give up on their kid when giving up would have been easier. I paused. Usually a music teacher. The table was very quiet now. So when you say substantial, I said, I want to make sure I understand what you mean. Because from where I stand, the work Nora does is some of the most substantial work I've seen up close. It just doesn't come with the kind of salary that makes it easy to brag about at dinner parties. I looked at Derek for one more second. Then I sat back down, picked up my fork, and resumed eating. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then the woman across the table said something to her husband, and the conversation started up again at a different angle entirely, and Derek's group drifted away with the slightly deflated energy of people who had expected something and gotten something else. Nora hadn't moved. I glanced at her. Her eyes were bright. Her jaw was tight. She was looking at her plate with the expression of someone working very hard to maintain composure in a public setting. You okay? I said quietly. She nodded once, picked up her water glass, set it down. He used to say that to me all the time, she said low enough for only me to hear. Not always those words, but that. The implication that what I did wasn't real work, that I was playing at a career. Her throat moved. After 2 years, I started to believe it. That's the part that's hard to say out loud. I actually started to believe him. That's what that kind of person does, I said. They say the same thing in enough different ways until it stops sounding like their opinion and starts sounding like fact. She looked at me. Something in her face shifted, the composure still there, but something underneath it loosening slightly. How did you know exactly what to say? She asked. I didn't, I said. I just said what was true. From across the room, Marge caught my eye over her wine glass. She held my gaze for a moment, steady, appraising, and then gave me a single slow nod that meant she had heard every word and had already filed it away somewhere permanent. Then Derek reappeared at the edge of my peripheral vision with Dana at his side, both of them watching us from across the room with expressions I couldn't fully read from this distance. Whatever was coming, it wasn't over. About an hour after the Derek situation, Nora leaned over and said quietly, Do you want to get out of here for a little while? How little? I asked. An hour. Jess won't notice she's been on the dance floor since the first song, and Paul's entire family has formed a protective perimeter around her. She nodded toward the barn doors. I know a place 10 minutes from here. I could use air that doesn't smell like Derek's cologne. We slipped out the side door. The October evening hit like something curative, cold and clean, 48 degrees, the mountains pressing in from every side in the dark, like something keeping watch. We walked along the gravel path beside the white fence, and neither of us rushed to fill the quiet with something unnecessary. That was something, Nora said after a while. He telegraphed it, I said. The whole evening, the way he was working the room. He was building an audience before he said anything. He always did that. She pulled her jacket tighter. He'd wait until we were somewhere public, around people whose opinion mattered to me. Then he'd say something and frame it as a joke or a compliment, and I'd be stuck because if I pushed back I was overreacting, and if I didn't push back it just became true. Her breath misted in the cold air. 2 years of that and you stopped being able to tell the difference between his voice and your own. We drove the 10 minutes into town and parked on Lexington Avenue, Asheville's version, tree-lined and local, nothing like New York. The place Nora had in mind was a small ice cream shop called Crestwood Creamery, wedged between a bookstore and a hardware store that had clearly been there since before either of us was born. A bell above the door chimed when we pushed in. Warm inside, bright smelling of sugar and waffle cones. A teenager named Brooks behind the counter looked up from his phone with the expression of someone who had been hoping for a slow Sunday and wasn't sure yet what to make of us. Nora stepped up to the case and looked at the flavors with genuine focus. Blackberry cheesecake, salted caramel pretzel, brown butter pecan. 14 options on the board. Vanilla, she said. 1 scoop, cone. Brooks accepted this with the resigned professionalism of someone who had learned not to editorialize. I ordered the same. We took the 2 stools at the window counter and I watched Nora take her first bite with the specific contentment of someone eating exactly what they wanted, and something about the simplicity of it, the complete absence of performance after an evening of nothing but performance, made my chest do something quiet and complicated. My dad always ordered vanilla, I said. She stopped, looked at her cone, then at me. Every time, she asked. Every single time. 14 flavors, seasonal specials, whatever. Vanilla. I looked out the window at Lexington Avenue, amber lit and quiet. I used to give him a hard time about it when I was a kid. I'd say, Dad, you could get anything. Why do you always get the same thing? And he'd say, because I know I like it, Caleb. Why would I risk a good thing on a gamble? Nora was quiet for a moment. The real kind. That's not boring, she said finally. That's a man who knew what he had. My throat tightened. Yeah, he did. She turned her cone slowly. My dad used to bring me to a shop a few blocks from here. Different place closed about 10 years ago. Saturday afternoons in the summer, just the 2 of us. A smile that was warm and sad at the same time. He always ordered strawberry. Every single summer. Never changed. She paused. He passed away 4 years ago. I looked at her. I didn't know that. You didn't ask, she said simply. Not accusatory, just true. I don't talk about it much. It's one of those things that's just always there underneath everything. You don't get over it. You just get used to carrying it. Yeah, I said. I'm starting to understand that. Outside on Lexington Avenue, a couple walked past arm in arm, their breath misting faintly in the cold. The street was quiet and ordinary and completely sufficient. Can I ask you something? Nora said. Yeah. Why did you do that back there? You didn't have to say anything. I thought about it honestly. Because he was wrong, I said. And he knew he was wrong. And everyone at that table was going to leave with his version of you in their head if nobody said anything different. I looked at her. That seemed worth standing up for. Nora looked at me for a long moment. The low window light was catching the side of her face, and she had the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for something to make sense and was only now starting to believe it might. I'm really glad you were in 14A, she said. Yeah, I said. Me too. We sat there for another few minutes in the warm, and the quiet close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm through my jacket, and somewhere between the vanilla ice cream and the amber streetlight and the way she was looking at me like I was someone she was glad to know. I reached over and tucked a piece of hair back from her face, the piece that had been escaping all evening, and my thumb stayed at her cheekbone. She leaned into it, just barely, just enough. I kissed her, quiet and careful and completely real. Her hand came up and rested flat against my chest over my sternum right where she'd placed it the day of the funeral, like she already knew that was the spot that needed the most attention. When we pulled back, she kept her hand where it was. We should probably go back, she said, voice low and slightly unsteady. Probably, I agreed. Neither of us moved for another few minutes. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Something shifted in her face, not fear exactly, more like the specific bracing of a person who has been waiting for the other shoe to drop and has just heard it. She turned the phone so I could see the screen. A text from Jess. "Where are you? Derek just made a scene. You need to get back here. We got back to the reception in under 10 minutes. We heard it before we saw it, the specific quality of silence that falls over a large room when something has happened that nobody is sure how to process yet." The band had stopped. Conversations had stalled. 100 people were arranged in the loose, uncertain way of an audience that hadn't been told it was an audience. Derek was standing in the center of it. He had clearly been talking. His posture said so, the way he was positioned with his back slightly to the wall, the group around him at the radius of people who were listening without being sure they'd chosen to. Dana was beside him, and whatever he'd been saying had drawn a crowd in the particular way that bad things draw crowds, not because people want to be there, but because leaving would require a decision, and the scene hasn't resolved yet. He saw us come through the side door. His expression recalibrated. Then he raised his voice, not shouting, just projecting the way someone does when they want a room to hear them without appearing to want that. "There she is," he said, warm, smiling, like we were all old friends. "Nora, I was just telling everyone about your new situation." His eyes moved to me with the specific assessment of someone who had already made their judgment and was now presenting it. "Where did you find this one?" "He's very earnest." Laughter from a few people, the uncertain kind that fills space. Dana stepped forward. Her voice was sharper than Derek's, less performance, more edge. "Nora, honestly, you left a perfectly good relationship, and for what?" She gestured at me. "He's what, a nurse, an ER nurse from Chicago." The way she said it wasn't a question. It was a category. Derek built something real. What does this person have? The room was very quiet. I looked at Dana, then at Derek, then at the room full of people waiting to see what happened next. "He showed up," Nora said. Her voice was completely level. She wasn't performing calm. She simply was calm the way you are when you've already decided something and don't need anyone else's permission to have decided it. "He showed up to my father's funeral with nothing asked and nothing expected," she said. "He stood up tonight when someone tried to make me feel small in a room full of people I care about. He showed up every time in the exact way the moment needed, and he never once made me feel like I was too much or not enough." She looked at Derek directly. "That's what this person has. Would you like me to go on?" Derek's smile was still there, but had gone thin and complicated. "Nora," he started. "I left because you monitored my phone," she said, still level, still calm. "I left because you gave me a weekly allowance and called it a budget. I left because you told me my work wasn't real in front of your colleagues and then told me I was being sensitive." Her voice didn't shake. Not once. "I didn't say any of that for 8 months because I didn't want to make a scene at Jess's wedding. But you made the scene, so here we are." The room had gone very still. And then the barn doors opened. 2 men in dark suits came in. Not wedding guests. The posture was wrong. The way they moved through the room was wrong, and one of them said clearly and without raising his voice, "Derek Voss." Derek turned. "IRS Criminal Investigation Division," the man said, holding up credentials. "Mr. Voss, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of federal tax fraud and filing of false returns. We're going to need you to come with us." The silence lasted approximately 3 full seconds. Then the room erupted. Not into chaos, into the specific noise of 100 people all processing the same information at different speeds and deciding simultaneously that they were allowed to react. Voices everywhere. Someone dropped a glass. The band, apparently deciding the evening had taken a direction beyond their expertise, quietly set down their instruments. Derek stood completely still in the center of all of it. The smile was gone. What was underneath it was smaller than I'd expected, not rage, not defiance. Just a man who had built everything on a foundation he knew was wrong and had been waiting maybe for years for exactly this moment to arrive. He looked at Dana. Dana looked back at him. Something crossed her face, the specific expression of someone who has just understood that the story they were in is not the story they thought they were in. She took 1 step back, then another. Then she turned and walked toward the exit with her head down and her heels clicking on the hardwood, and she did not look back. The IRS agents walked Derek out through the barn doors. Jess appeared from somewhere in the crowd and grabbed Nora's hand with both of hers, eyes wide somewhere between laughter and tears. "Are you okay? Is this real? Did that just happen?" "That just happened," Nora said. At my wedding, Jess said. At your wedding, Nora confirmed. Jess looked at me, then back at Nora. Then she started laughing, the helpless kind, the kind that comes from a situation being so far outside what you planned for that your body doesn't know what else to do with it. Nora started laughing too. And somewhere in the middle of the two of them laughing in the middle of a wedding reception while the IRS was walking Jess's uninvited guest out through the barn doors, I thought that my father would have absolutely loved every second of this. From 2 tables over, Marge set down her wine glass and started to applaud. Slowly at first, then the table next to her joined, then the next. By the time the barn doors swung shut behind Derek Voss, the entire reception was on its feet. The reception found its footing again about 20 minutes after Derek left. Slowly at first, conversations restarting, the band picking up their instruments with the tentative energy of people who weren't sure what the room needed and settled on something with a good beat. Then Jess pulled Paul onto the dance floor, and that was all it took. The evening reassembled itself around the actual reason everyone was there, which was a woman in a white dress and a man who watched her like she was the most specific miracle he'd ever been lucky enough to be standing next to. Nora and I found a spot near the edge of the room with fresh drinks and watched it all reconstitute. "You okay?" I asked. "Yes," she said. Then, "No, maybe." She almost smiled. "Ask me again in an hour." "Okay," I said. She leaned her shoulder against mine and didn't say anything for a moment, and the music wrapped around us and the string lights were warm overhead, and outside the barn windows the October mountains were doing what they always did, existing, enormous and indifferent, keeping their own counsel. "I've been wanting to say that for 8 months, she said finally. "What stopped you?" "Jess's wedding." She turned her glass slowly. "I kept thinking if I said any of it out loud before today it would somehow get back to him and he'd find a way to turn it into something else. He was always very good at that." She paused. "But then he made the scene himself, and I thought, okay, if he's going to blow it up anyway, I might as well say what's true." "You said it perfectly," I said. "I said it scared out of my mind," she said. "My hands were shaking the whole time. Could you tell—" I looked at her. "No," I said. "Not even a little." She let out a breath that had been held for a while. "Good." The band shifted to something slow. Couples drifted toward the center of the floor. Paul's parents, a few people our age. Jess and Paul themselves, swaying in the comfortable way of 2 people who didn't need to impress anyone. Nora looked at the dance floor, then at me. "Do you dance?" she asked. I considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "I have a policy," I said. "A policy. Formal and binding, self-imposed, non-negotiable, based on 2 incidents in my 20s that I am not going to describe in detail." She pressed her lips together. "A formal policy." "It has clauses," I said. She looked at the dance floor, then back at me. Then she tilted her head toward the side door. "I could use some air. It's warm in here." I looked at her. "It's 48 degrees outside." "I run hot," she said completely deadpan and turned toward the door. The porch wrapped around the back of the farmhouse, looking out over the dark pasture and the tree line, and beyond that the mountains against a sky thick with stars. The air was cold and clean and smelled like hay and wood smoke and October. After the noise and heat of the barn, it hit like something necessary. Nora leaned against the railing, both hands around her glass, tilting her face up toward the stars. "Better," she said. "Better," I agreed. We stood there for a while. The music from inside was muffled enough to become just texture, something soft underneath the sound of the night. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "What made you come really? When I sent that text, I half expected you to politely find a reason not to. You just lost your father. You had every excuse in the world." I thought about it. About sitting at my father's kitchen table with a legal pad and a yellow legal pad and a phone that had buzzed with a question from someone I'd met 4 days earlier on a plane. About the bracelet I'd found on the shelf. About the note in my father's uneven handwriting. "My dad left me a note," I said, "with something he'd been saving for me. He said I'd know when the time was right." I looked out at the dark pasture. "And I'd spent 2 years making every decision out of fear. Fear of losing him, fear of being too far away, fear of what happened if I stopped being useful to everyone and just showed up for myself for once." I looked at her. "Your text didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like the first thing in a long time that I actually wanted to do." Nora looked at me for a moment. The low light from the barn windows was catching her face, and she had the expression of someone who has been listening very carefully and has arrived somewhere they didn't expect. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. I'm going to say something and I need you to tell me if I'm wrong." "Okay." "This stopped being about the wedding for me a long time ago," she said. Steady. Completely sure. "Somewhere around the time you stood up from that table." "For me it was the vanilla," I said. She stared at me. "The vanilla? You didn't explain it," I said. "You just ordered it, like you already knew what you wanted and didn't need to justify it." I looked at her. I haven't met many people who know that about themselves. Something in her face let go completely the last of the composure, the last of the evening's armor, and she laughed surprised and warm, and I kissed her because it was the only thing that made sense, quiet and careful and real. Her hand came up flat against my chest over my sternum right where she'd placed it the day of the funeral. When we pulled back, she kept her hand where it was. "Same page?" she asked, voice low. "Same page," I said. From inside the barn, the song ended. Something upbeat started. The floor erupted back to life. We stayed on the porch. I woke up early Sunday morning in a room at a bed and breakfast 2 miles from the venue under a quilt that weighed 40 pounds and smelled like cedar and was the best thing I had slept under in recent memory. I lay there listening to Asheville wake up birds. A car starting down the road, the particular quiet of a Sunday morning in a small city that takes its time and thought about my father, not with the weight I'd been carrying all week. Something different. Lighter without being less real. Like the grief had shifted position, moved from the center of my chest to somewhere to the left where it could exist alongside other things instead of blocking them out entirely. I got dressed, checked my jacket pocket. The gold bracelet was there. I took it out, delicate links, small clasp worn smooth the way jewelry gets from decades of daily use. My mother had worn this every morning for years. My father had kept it every year since. And then he had written a note in his slow, careful handwriting and left it in a box on a shelf in my childhood bedroom for the day I would finally look. I put it back in my pocket and went to find Nora. She was on the back porch of the bed and breakfast in one of the wooden chairs, both hands around a coffee mug, still in her clothes from last night with a flannel blanket over her shoulders that she'd clearly borrowed from inside. Hair down and slightly wild. The look of someone who had been awake for a while and was comfortable with that. "Coffee's inside," she said when she heard the screen door. "Owner leaves it out at 6. It's very good." I went in, poured a mug, came back out and took the chair beside her. 42 degrees. The sky pale gray-blue of very early light, the mountains emerging from the dark the way they do in Asheville mornings, slowly like something deciding to be visible. A blue jay was making noise in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. We sat with our coffee and watched the morning come in. "Last night was something," Nora said after a while. "Yeah," I said. "It was." Jess texted me at midnight. She said it was the most memorable wedding reception she'd ever heard of, and she was including it in her vows anniversary speech every year for the rest of her life. Nora smiled into her mug. She also said Paul's uncle already has a theory that she planned the whole Derek arrest as a surprise entertainment. I laughed. Actually laughed full and real in the cold Sunday morning air. After a moment, I reached into my jacket pocket and set the gold bracelet on the arm of the chair between us. Nora looked at it, then at me. She reached out and touched it with one finger carefully, the way you touch something that belongs to someone you respect. "Tell me," she said. "My mother's," I said. "My dad gave it to her the week he first told her he loved her. He kept it after she passed. When I was going through his things Thursday night, I found it in a small wooden box on the shelf in my old bedroom." I looked at the gold links catching the early light. There was a note with it, his handwriting slow the way it had gotten this past year. He said I'd know when the time was right. My voice did something I let it do. He said don't wait as long as he did. Nora's throat moved. Her finger stayed resting on the bracelet. "Caleb," she said quietly. "I know how it looks," I said. 4 days. I know what 4 days sounds like from the outside, but my dad waited years to say what he needed to say to my mom. And then she got sick, and then she was gone. And he spent the rest of his life with this bracelet in a box. My jaw tightened. I watched my father die from 700 miles away because I told myself there'd be more time, and then there wasn't. I looked at her. I don't want to be that man again. Nora's eyes were bright and wet at the corners. She pressed her lips together, holding something in. "It doesn't have to mean everything right now," I said. It can just mean I see you, and I don't want to wait to say so. I picked up the bracelet and held it out. Only if you want it. She took it from my palm, turned it over in her fingers, studying the small clasp, the delicate gold links. Then she put it on her own wrist and fastened it herself, deliberate, certain. She held her wrist up and looked at it against the pale morning sky and the mountains behind it. I want it, she said, simply, completely. We sat with our coffee. The blue jay had finally gone quiet. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. The day of the funeral, the wreath. She held my gaze. How did I know where your house was? I assumed Jess, I said. Jess recognized your name when I called her that Wednesday night. She knew your family, knew the house. Nora looked at the bracelet on her wrist. I didn't tell you I was coming because I didn't want you to feel like you had to take care of me while you were taking care of your father. She looked back up. I just couldn't not come. The hairline fracture again, the held breath loosening. That makes complete sense, I said. She reached over and put her hand over mine on the arm of the chair. Warm, steady. Asheville's a small town, she said. Small enough we should have met a long time ago, I said. Maybe we weren't ready, she said. I thought about that. About 2 kids at the same lake, same summer, 20 feet apart. About a plane seat. About a box on a shelf. Or maybe I said the timing was exactly right. She squeezed my hand once, turned back to the mountains with her coffee and her flannel blanket, and my mother's gold bracelet on her wrist. The morning was quiet and beautiful and completely ours. We drove out to Blue Ridge Lake after breakfast. Nobody suggested it out loud. We finished our coffee, looked at each other, and 15 minutes later we were in the rental car heading west on the Blue Ridge Parkway with the windows cracked and the mountains coming in from every direction and the Sunday morning light doing something extraordinary to the tree line. October in Asheville. Gold and red and the deep green of evergreens holding their color through everything. I had grown up under these mountains and left them and come back to bury my father. And somewhere in all of that I had forgotten what they looked like when they were just beautiful. Not heavy, not symbolic, just exactly what they were. I was paying attention now. We parked at the east trailhead and walked down to the water. The path was narrow, covered in fallen leaves, our footsteps quiet on them. The air smelled like cold water and pine and the clean emptiness of elevation, the kind that makes your lungs feel rinsed out and your thoughts feel clearer than they have any right to be. The lake appeared around a bend. Still and dark, the mountains reflected in the surface so perfectly it looked like 2 sets of them, one above one below the world, folded in half along the waterline. Nora stopped walking. I stopped beside her. My dad used to bring me here, she said, the tone of someone who has learned to carry a person rather than get over them. Every summer, same parking spot, same path. She looked out at the water. He'd fish on the east bank, always the same spot. Said the bass were better there. A small smile. I think he just liked the view and didn't want to admit it. Something moved in my chest. What spot? I asked. She pointed. A flat rock jutting out over the water 30 yards to our left. Large, gray, worn smooth in the way that takes decades. I looked at it for a long moment. My dad fished from that rock, I said. Nora turned. What? Every Saturday morning, April through October, my whole childhood. My voice went somewhere quiet. He called it his spot, said nobody else ever used it. I looked at the rock, the dark water, the mountains doubled below the surface. I used to sit on the bank behind him and throw rocks while he fished. 6, maybe 7 years old, right there. I pointed at the trees behind the rock. Her hand came up over her mouth. Caleb, she said. We were here at the same time, I said. Same summers, same lake, same rock. My throat tightened. 20 feet apart, we had no idea the other person existed. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard and the tears came anyway, fast spilling over, and she made a sound in the back of her throat that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. The specific sound of something too large to be only one emotion at a time. Our dads fished from the same rock, she said, voice completely wrecked. For years. While we sat on the bank behind them, I said, and didn't know each other existed. She turned and buried her face in my shoulder and cried the deep kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below grief and emerges feeling almost like relief. I held on and looked out at the water and thought about 2 men standing on a flat gray rock in the early morning with their fishing lines in the water. My father, who knew everyone's name. Nora's father, who drove his daughter to this lake every summer and pretended the spot was about the bass. They had to have known each other. In a town this small, fishing the same rock for years, they had to have talked. And in those conversations, the way people do, they had to have mentioned their kids. After a while, the crying slowed. Nora lifted her head. Face wet, eyes read more completely herself than at any point in the past 4 days. "I think they planned this," she said. I laughed, actually laughed, surprised and real. "You think our fathers planned this? I think they knew each other," she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. 2 men, same rock, years of Saturday mornings. They talked. And your dad left you that bracelet and wrote that note because he'd already done the math. She looked at the gold bracelet on her wrist, catching the October light. "He just had to wait for you to catch up." I looked at the bracelet. My father's handwriting still in my jacket pocket. "Don't wait as long as I did, son." He had fished this lake for 30 years. So had her father. I had stopped believing things were accidents somewhere over Tennessee on a Thursday morning when a woman in a yellow jacket asked me what my father was like. But standing here at the edge of this water, I felt it settle into something permanent. The kind of certainty that lives below the level where arguments operate. Some things are accidents. I used to believe most things were. I don't anymore. Nora laced her fingers through mine, and we stood at the edge of Blue Ridge Lake in the cold Sunday morning, and I thought about everything it had taken to get here. My mother dying, my father fishing this rock alone, after that coming back every Saturday because some places hold the people you've lost in a way nothing else manages. Nora's father doing the same. 2 kids on the bank in the same summer sunshine, 20 feet apart, not knowing. Years of distance and loss and wrong timing. A wife who left on a February morning with a hug that meant goodbye. A phone turned off on a Tuesday night. A Thursday flight with 2 open seats in row 14. A woman in a yellow jacket who asked me what my father was like. My father believed the most important thing a person could do was show up for whoever was standing in front of them. Not the grand gesture, not the perfectly timed words. Just presence, consistent, quiet, unglamorous presence. The kind that doesn't make headlines but makes lives. I had understood that about him my whole life and spent years failing to apply it to myself. Nora didn't fix me. That's not how it works. She just showed up, on a plane, at a funeral with a wreath she left without knocking, in a text about a bait shop, with a vanilla ice cream cone she didn't explain, on a porch at 48 degrees, at a lake on a Sunday morning where our fathers once stood side by side. She showed up, and in the weight of all those small appearances I remembered how. If this story landed somewhere real for you, if any part of it hit something you recognize, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if you know someone who's been carrying something heavy and quietly for too long, send this to them. Sometimes the right story at the right moment is its own kind of wreath left on a porch railing. Subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one. I'll be here.